Welcome to the week number 3 overview for economic analysis of the law here at Rutgers University in Camden. And in this week, we are going to be finishing up Chapter 4, An Economic Theory of Property. So we'll be starting from page 94, in particular the section on how property rights are protected. Additionally, we go through the distinction of what can be privately owned. This is a distinction between what are public goods and what are private goods, and what are the implications for the distinction between those two. Also, we look at what may be done with the property people own. So there's some issues associated with that in the chapter. Make sure you understand them. And also, there's a brief note on distribution. And once you finish the chapter, there are 3 important concepts that I hope everybody will take away from Chapter 4. The first of these concepts is the contention that one can profitably view property law as a method for fostering the efficient use of resources. Traditional legal scholarship views property law as a method of assigning, enforcing, and redistributing entitlements to resources, but with no clear objective in mind other than perhaps to do justice. The second core concept that the chapter develops is the Coase theorem and the definition of transaction costs. These are, without doubt, the important ideas in law and economics. They apply not just to property law, but to all law. Indeed, the central concern of the Coase theorem is to articulate a method for choosing the most appropriate social method by which to move resources into the hands of those who place the highest value on them. One way of looking at the Coase theorem is to read it as saying that you should use arm's length bargaining to move resources to their highest use when bargaining works well. And by bargaining works well, we mean that transaction costs are very low, and that we use other methods of determining the highest value user when bargaining fails. An important implication, which we develop in the discussion of normative Coase and Hobbes theorems, is to use the law to facilitate bargaining. For instance, one could argue that contract law is a method of lowering the transaction costs for concluding mutually beneficial consensual agreements. It is therefore extremely vital that students get comfortable with the notion of transaction costs and the Coase theorem and its variations that are present in the chapter. The third concept is the distinction between property rules and liability rules. This is a distinction that was made by Judge Guido Calabresi and A. Douglas Malamed in 1972. As should be pretty well evident from the text, the Calabresi-Malamed analysis is an extension of the Coase theorem. This distinction between methods of protecting legal entitlements is one that arises in every area of the law. Students must leave this course with a clear understanding of the difference between property rules and liability rules. We then move on to Chapter 5, which is Topics in Economics of Property Law, up to page 143. So we will only be covering the first part of the chapter, which is what can be privately owned. So make sure you go through this chapter. It has some very interesting things, and think about this as things that might not be tangible. It's pretty easy to make it to discern who is the owner of a house, but then you have ownership of things that aren't tangible. For example, information, i.e. there might be trade secrets that a company has, the ownership of those trade secrets. Intellectual property, for example, books, etc., those different types of things, and the use of patents in this area. Also, copyrights, for example, copywriting material, who owns that material, who holds the copyright, and also trademarks. In one of the forum discussions, we talk about trademarks. Make sure it's important and it's an interesting area to look at. I was recently reading and I saw something where the owner of a name of a formerly prominent band that was very popular in the 1980s, was suing a cafe that was selling tea, etc., for infringing upon the trademark of the band name, claiming that there was confusion, that people might think that the band owned this cafe in a particular area. So what is a trademark and why it's important to protect that trademark. And additionally, in that section, we also make a distinction between public and private property. So make sure you're comfortable with the distinction between those two.